it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Chapter 10. Over the next few days, I continued to help James get his alcohol abuse in check. We started to revisit each and every person who we questioned in regards to every murder. We thought that if there was a police officer involved, then the investigation may have been deliberately misled. Going through the evidence, we noticed that the details in the police reports regarding the murders of Juliet Knight, Maggie Darner, and Jessica Price were all quite brief in terms of detail compared to the other 5 victims. Knight, Darner, and Price were the only victims who were discovered in Missouri. We decided to talk to the detective leading the investigation, a Detective Hansen. We called the KC police chief and requested a meeting with the detective in regards to those murders. An appointment was arranged for the next day. We planned to talk to the families of Darner and Price. We couldn't talk to the Knight family, they were all dead. So bright and early we got our stuff together and headed towards the KCPD depot. On our route to Lexington and Columbus, I turned to Agent Rodriguez, who looked a little on edge. "Everything okay?" I probed. He was resting his temples against his fingers and thumb, massaging them gently. My question caused him to stop and face me. Yeah," he half answered. "You sure?" I asked facetiously. "Yeah, I'm just feeling a bit dragged out. I don't know if it's the withdrawal or whatever, but the nightmares have started again." "Quince?" "Yeah," he answered, lifting his head up momentarily to show he was listening. "I'm honestly so proud of you. Keep this up and you should have detoxed in a day or 2. I smiled at him encouragingly, and he half smiled back. We walked into Kansas City PD and requested to see the officer in charge of the Knight, Darner, and Price murders, which, coincidentally, was the same person who'd heckled me at the briefing, Detective Mark Hansen. The desk sergeant told us to take a seat while he fetched Hansen. We sat down in the waiting room, and something caught my eye. A jar half filled with coins and dollar bills on the front desk. It had a note on the front that I couldn't quite see from my vantage point, so I stood up and made my way around to take a look. The note read, "For the family of Officer Stevenson." My eyes widened and my throat clenched when I realized the significance of the name. I had no time to react before James came up behind me. "He's here, Ruth. Come on," he informed me gently over my shoulder. "James?" I prompted him with my eyes toward the jar and the notes. "What?" James asked, taking his gaze from me to the jar. I saw him as he read the notes. His gaze went from curiosity to concern. We shared a look, just as a voice yelled at us from across the room. "Can I help you guys or what?" Detective Hansen yelled, impatiently. James ushered us over to the detective, and we went into his office. Hansen sat down behind his desk in a chair that I thought looked a little too expensive for a state detective, but I let it go. "Miss Maddock, nice to see you again." There was an almost sarcastic tone to his greeting. "So, what can I help you guys with?" Hansen asked. Elbows rested on the arms of his chair, his fingers interlocked, a crabby expression plastered on his face. Clearly a busy man who didn't think much of us suited-up federal servants. James, who had either shaken off his crippling withdrawals or he was hiding them extremely well, leant forward in a confident manner. "We were just hoping you could tell us why the case reports on the murders of Juliet Knight, Maggie Darner, and Jessica Price don't have as much detail as the rest of the Roadside Slayings. 3 of the 8 murder victims in all these cases were assigned to you. Can you explain this to me? It's just I've gone through some of your other homicide casework in the past, and it's quite frankly excellent. No stone unturned. Plethora of information, you might say." Hansen scoffed and gave James an intimidating glare. "The case files had everything in them that needed to be. Causes of death, where the bodies were found, possible suspects, and so on." Well, you see, that's where I beg to differ. The reports on the other 5 victims, there were other suspects on the list. Abusive ex-boyfriends, Facebook stalkers, disgruntled clients, but, well, in these 3 reports, the only suspect is the elusive unsub, the Roadside Ripper. Did you not think it was worth investigating any other avenues? James quizzed further. Hanson chuckled at the implication he was either incompetent or corrupt. He leant forward to match James's demeanor, showing he wouldn't be intimidated. Those 3 murders, bar Bethany Matthews, were the most recent victims. By this point, we know this killer's M.O. Why waste time investigating other avenues when it's obviously the killer was expanding his territory? Coroner confirmed the methods of torture and death were the same as the other roadside victims. Violently tortured, reproductive organs mutilated, and then either died from blood loss or strangulation. Textbook M.O. of our resident serial killer. Now, if that's all, I have a killer to catch. Hanson stood upright in a huff, inviting us to leave by showing us the direction of the door. We both nodded and accepted the invite. So are we, Detective. We want to catch whoever's doing this. We just wanted all the information possible to make that happen. I understand why you have tunnel vision on this, but, well, it may be worth speaking to some of the victims' families. They could perhaps shed some light on if they knew who matches our profile. Well, the last killer I investigated, I caught when he made the mistake of killing someone that he knew, I explained diplomatically. Hanson hung his head and nodded gently. Adams and Mallor. There'll forever be stains on the badge. I understand now why feds are suspicious of cops, especially from around these parts. But believe me, Miss Maddock, we're not the enemy, Hanson stated genuinely. I gave him a smile. I know. We're sorry for making you feel threatened, James added. Oh, I'm sorry for being defensive. It's been tough recently. We recently had a vet commit suicide because one of the victims was his daughter. Then 2 days ago, a rookie went the same way after Bethany Matthews basically died in his arms. Everyone's a little distracted, Hanson confessed. Stevenson didn't look shaken by the Matthew murder, but I wouldn't have flagged him as a suicide risk. Well, I'm sorry to hear. Well, in that case, you focus on the Matthews case. We'll go chat to some of the families from the Price and Knight cases. We'll let you know if we find anything, I said, trying to sound supportive. Hanson stared at us for a few seconds, presumably trying to weigh up if we were being helpful or patronizing. Tell you what, wait here. Help yourself to tea, coffee. I'll go get a list of known associates of those victims. Numbers, addresses. Call it a peace offering, he offered, holding his palms out and shrugging his shoulders. Oh, thank you, Detective. That sounds great. James accepted. Hanson left the room, and me and James took him up on his offer of a hot beverage. What do you think? I asked, wanting James's opinion on Hanson. Well, hard to tell. No cop likes having their work ethic or morals brought into question, but if this killer is a cop, it's highly likely someone with a marked car, like a patrol officer. Someone who can pull people over or approach them without concerning them. Detective doesn't make sense. That if it's even a cop. A pig could have meant anything. Why not write cop? James let his train of thought run away with him for a little while. Well, I guess we'll see what we find out from our inquiries with the And the office door swung open, cutting me off mid-sentence. So here's a list of the victims' home addresses, relatives, known romantic connections. Hope this helps. Hey, keep me in the loop, yeah? Hanson said, handing the paper to James. James shook his hand and smiled in appreciation. I mimicked the gesture and assured him we'd be in touch. We left the station and climbed into our car and set off to the first address. We headed over to the Kansas City state border into Missouri and made our way up to Lexington. It took us just under an hour to reach the family home of Maggie Donna. The area had quite a vibe to it. Nothing much happened in this quiet town, but the dumping of Maggie Donna's heavily mutilated body on the side of Highway 24 was clearly the worst thing to ever happen around these parts. We pulled the car up outside the grey wooden townhouse, climbed out, making sure we had our IDs handy. We walked up the garden path, which had a slight incline to the front porch. James tapped politely but firmly on the screen door and awaited an answer. We were just about to leave when a man, who'd probably just passed the status of middle-aged, answered the door. "Can I help you?" he asked tentatively, clearly weighing up if we were here for him. Oh, I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Darner. My name's Professor Ruth Maddock, and this is Special Agent Rodriguez. We're just here following up some inquiries into your, The man scowled and held his hand up, cutting me off mid-sentence. I was getting sick of that happening, in all honesty. I think there's been some sort of clerical error. Darners haven't lived here for nearly a year now, and we bought this place from them, as they were moving to Grandview, if I remember correctly. Something about father, new job, can't remember the specific details. Terrible news about their daughter. Terrible, the man said, arms folded, shaking his head as he stared at the floor panels of his white porch. James and I shared a confused look. James then turned to the man. Yeah, sorry, our records department can sometimes forget to delete these old addresses, and then this happens. Can't get the staff, can you? James joked. So, you don't know the forwarding address then? Oh, we did, but we got rid of the paperwork during the last spring clean. Anyway, after their daughter turned up just outside the town on 24, we assumed they moved back, the man speculated. We didn't know how to answer the man's theory. We were totally in the dark, so we simply nodded in agreement. Well, thanks for your time, Mr. Evans. Tony Evans. Well, Mr. Evans, please take my card. If you happen to come across anything regarding the Darner family or their current whereabouts, James requested, handing the man his card. The man examined it and put it in his pocket. Well, holy cow. Not every day you get to meet a famous FBI agent, the man exclaimed, and James grimaced. Ah, it is you, isn't it? We saw you on that Netflix documentary that came out a couple of years ago. We loved it. Inside the Hive. Hey, is it true that the undercover officer had his cover blown and he had his nuts cracked with a claw hammer? Oh, was that just for dramatized entertainment? The man asked, genuinely intrigued. I stared at James, a little taken aback. It's, true. Clayton was a good agent, instrumental in gathering the evidence we needed. Did not deserve what happened, James said, sheepishly. The man made a religious gesture by tapping the 4 points of the cross on his body and head. Definitely not. Oh, don't forget the kid who saw that murder and had to go into protection. Hey, is it true you and your partner were moving him across the country until the trial? Because these guys sent someone after him to shut him up. The man fired another question, like an excited fan. Yeah, that's right, James answered bluntly. Why not just put him in a safe house under FBI protection? Why keep moving him? That's what me and my wife wanted to know. A little unorthodox, no? The man probed. Well, the question made James uncomfortable. I could sense it, and I butted in. Oh, sorry, Mr. Evans. We have other places to be. Thanks for your time, I said politely. James nodded. It's actually quite common practice these days. Worked, didn't it? We got him to trial. Well, thanks for your time, Mr. Evans, James said as he walked off the porch. Goodbye, the man yelled. Wait till Bernie hears about this. We heard the man celebrate to himself as he re-entered the house. We climbed in the car and set off towards the address we had for the Price home. As we were driving, I turned to James. Netflix, huh? I asked him with a smirk, which James returned. Yeah, they were becoming loads of internet detectives on Reddit, looking into the swarm and their command network, digging up info, trying to find out who the real top boss was. Because we were hiding Henry Gifford's involvement, we needed a way to get in front of it. A Netflix documentary was made. The FBI were sort of a secret producer. We included the undercover operation, some of the witnesses, the 10 commanding entities in the swarm. Did you know that online theories into the Stephen Ivory murder case actually reduced by 73% after Making a Murderer was released? People see a comprehensive 10-part series on a case, and they think they've been given the truth. That's the effect we wanted, James informed me. Makes sense. Okay, one more thing. Go on. Why did you lie to the guy and say it's normal to move witnesses continuously? Because as far as I'm aware, it isn't. I was genuinely intrigued, and it obviously wasn't in the documentary, even if I did have time to Netflix and chill, as the kids say these days. Our UCA relayed information at the command cell. It's the information that blew his cover, but with it, we had more than enough to convict. It was a laptop with an encrypted dongle and chat room that the top 10 in the swarm used to contact Gibson. He managed to get his hands on it and get it to us. Our IT guys took a week to decipher everything, but once we did, well, we had them. Just before Clayton was made, he relayed info that the swarm had someone in the federal government. This kid had witnessed the murder of an FBI asset, a surveillance operative, and a little girl hostage. Him and his friend went to the local police. They killed his friend, and they were dirty too. The swarm's reach was clearly wide and vast. We managed to get to him before the swarm's hitmen did. We kept him and his family safe and moving. Until we knew if we had the snake in our ranks, we couldn't risk putting him in a federal safe house. And we were right to. Gibson all along. Well, at least it's over now, I said, optimistically. James nodded, but didn't say a word. We arrived in Holden, again in just under an hour. Very similar town to Lexington, quiet and rural. Price's body was dumped around 20 minutes away, just outside Columbus on Highway 50. Again, brutally raped, tortured, and eventually, mercifully killed. Another silent neighborhood where a tumbleweed wouldn't have looked out of place. We approached the door. The garden looked unkempt, paint peeling, and the panel door was barely hanging on. James even knocked on the side of the house, afraid he'd finished the door off. No answer. He tried again, this time louder, but nothing. Eventually I tried one more time, as loud as I could while screaming, "Mr. and Mrs. Price, this is the FBI. It's about your daughter." Well, James gave me a confused look, questioning if that was necessary. I didn't want another wasted journey. However, it was looking like that was the way it was going, except just as we were retreating to the car, a voice began yelling at us from down the street. Hey, wait! Don't leave!" A young teen began yelling as she hurried towards us, pushing a pram in tow. This girl was no older than 20. She'd have been Jessica's age, or thereabouts. "Can we help you?" I asked. "You heard about Jessica, right?" she asked, the baby cooing in its bed from all the commotion. She shushed him back to sleep as I confirmed who we were. "You found that little cunt who did it yet?" she demanded to know. A little taken back by her language and directness, James needed a second to think of what he needed to say. Sorry, who are you?" he asked. "Mary White, Jessica's best friend. You found the bastard that cut my girl then." Her southern twang was powerful. Inquiries are still ongoing," James said, officially. "That means fucking no then, don't it?" the girl said, rolling her eyes. "I made hundreds of phone calls to your tip line telling about her new boyfriend, but no one ever wanted to know," she added. Me and James, our eyes widened in unison. We both turned to the girl. "Sorry, what boyfriend?" James asked. She said he was from the city. I never trusted him. He was nice looking and everything, but he just had something about him that I didn't trust," the girl confided. "Was this guy at the funeral?" James inquired. "Hell no, he weren't." "Now, what'd that tell you, huh?" she asked, hands on hips. "Well, that is odd," I confessed. "What did this guy look like?" James asked. 6 foot, mid to late 20s, black, slick back hair. Looked like he had a bit of something else in him. Hispanic, maybe, I don't know. Nice skin, deep brown eyes, good teeth. Like I said, real good looking." The girl described literally the opposite of Detective Hanson. "Okay, we'll look into it. Here, take this. Call me if you ever see this guy again, but don't approach him, not until we can verify who he is." "Did she say if this guy had a name?" James asked, finishing his notes and handing the girl another card. "Pablo. Didn't say if he had a last name. Guy had money, though. Always picked her up in a flash car. Asked me if I wanted to come with, but I had to watch this one," she explained, gesturing towards her baby. "You know where Mr. Price is, or Mrs. Price?" I asked, gesturing towards the house we just visited. "Mrs. Price, yeah. Shortly after Jess was born, she got the cancer," she informed us. "And Mr. Price?" James asked. He's dead too." "What? How?" I probed. "He was always into the needle, but he got clean around a year ago. This business must have set him off because cops found him OD'd in his bed, needle in his arm. Enough heroin to kill a horse, apparently." "Oh, jeez," I exclaimed. "Yeah, he did go a little crazy, though. He was always complaining that the police weren't doing their job and not following up leads on Pablo. Guess the stress just got to him in the end," Mary speculated. "Well, thank you. You've been really helpful," James concluded. Mary slipped the card in her bra, and she retreated with her baby. We climbed back in the car and set off back towards Kansas. Chapter 11. Why wasn't any of this in the file? The Downers move away. That could be an admin issue, easily explained. But the fact that Jessica Price's father and her friend made multiple inquiries about a mysterious boyfriend and there's nothing in here about it? Oh, that's weird. Then, not to mention, nothing about the father's death. Something doesn't make sense here, I exclaimed, and James murmured in agreement. But, Pablo is young, rich, mixed race, and good-looking. Hanson's middle-aged, dressed, and whiter than rice. I'm starting to think maybe this Pablo could be our guy, and he's benefiting from police tunnel vision, James speculated. I didn't answer, and stared off into the countryside. You don't agree? James quizzed. Just doesn't fit our profile, I stated. I don't know. I bet there's not many young damsels in distress who wouldn't get into a flash car with a handsome stranger these days. Do you? James probed. No, I guess not, I conceded. Besides, his appearance fits the DNA profile. And you said he'd be young, James added. A brief silence passed before I suddenly piped up with something on my mind. I just think it can't be coincidental that the two victims we've inquired about today have a connection to Kansas City. Like, why did the killer dump Maggie Donna outside our old town when she just moved to the city? Our guy lives and hunts in the country, not the city. Something just isn't adding up. We're missing something, James. I know it. I assured myself as much as I did James. James began to nod gently. Well, let's get some answers, he said, pulling out his cell phone and dialing a number. He held the phone to his ear, and he kept his eyes on the road. Hi, can you put me through to Detective Hanson? Tell him it's Agent Rodriguez, he said in a stern voice. A few brief moments passed before someone picked up the phone again. Oh, hi, Detective. Listen, we chased up those leads you gave us, but they were dead ends, although we were told by a neighbor that the Donna family had moved to Kansas City. Could you make some calls and find an address for me? We really think it'll be worth speaking to them. A few more moments passed while James listened to the response from Hanson. He just simply nodded along to whatever he was saying. Don't worry about it. Thank you. I appreciate that. Look forward to it. All right, I'll be in touch tomorrow when we've spoken to them. Yep, you too, he said, hanging up the call and then putting the phone back on its charging dock. So, what did he say? I asked. He apologized for wasting our time. Says he's been too busy to chase up the family. He'll find a current address and text it to me later tonight, James informed me. You didn't mention Mary White or Pablo. You're not convinced about him, are you? I asked with a smirk. Oh, ask me that again after tomorrow. We arrived back at our motel a few hours later. It was dark by then. Me and James were walking to our rooms when the text came in. Hanson sent us an address just outside Ottawa, Kansas, a little town called Homewood. We'd head there tomorrow. As we reached our rooms, we lingered outside for a moment to review the day, so to speak. James eyed me intensely. Ruth, do you believe in fate? He asked thoughtfully. I smirked at his sudden toe dip into philosophy. Like a higher power, moving all the pieces around, moving towards a common end? No, I've seen too much violence and chaos in this world to know that there's no such thing. We're all put here, and we just do the best we can with what's given, I answered, honestly. James seemed to be struggling with something. He could barely look me in the eye. He looked like he had something to say or ask, but was buying time with pointless questions. Well, I didn't either, but I think things put your way, and then you need to look out for it. I've been struggling with this for a few days, but after seeing how quickly things could be snatched away from us, I've decided to believe in fate. James left his words to hang in my ears before he did the unthinkable. He kissed me. My eyes widened. I was shaken. For a split second, I swore I could see Quince over James's shoulder, looking disappointed. I pushed James back. "What are you doing?" I demanded to know. James could barely look at me. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I've just thought since the minute I met you that you're one of the most incredible, beautiful people I've ever met. You helped me sober up and became myself again. Well, I just thought..." "Well, you thought wrong. God, you know how much I miss Quincy, and you've tried to take advantage," I snapped. "No, Ruth, that's not true. I just..." James was lost. "We're colleagues, helping to solve a violent string of rapes and murders. Nothing more, nothing less. I think we should call it a night. We have a long day tomorrow," I instructed harshly. I then stormed away and into my room and left James to lick his wounds. When I woke up the next morning, I found myself in a moment of self-exploration as I made myself presentable for the day ahead. Well, I did like James. He was a strong, intelligent, kind, and integral man. He was easy to look at, too. I think I reacted the way I did because I felt guilty that it was only a few months back I had feelings for James's friend, and had he not been murdered by the psycho that I helped escape from prison, well, we'd potentially have a future. I was extremely harsh on James. I decided to go speak to him. I left my room and made my way down to the local coffee shop. I grabbed James's favorite latte and a croissant to go with it, a peace offering. I retrieved it at the motel and knocked on his door, optimistic about where this talk could go. Well, I was smiling to myself, but that didn't last long. James wasn't answering the door. I began to get worried, so I went to the front desk and requested a spare key. Well, they were happy to oblige, given that they'd seen us together. I went back to the room and inserted the key. I opened the door, and my heart sank at what I found. I drove towards Homewood, expecting to be there within an hour. Traffic depending, of course. I was upset, disappointed, and most of all, furious, with James, but also myself. I found James face down on the bed, almost comatose, with 5 large empty bottles of whiskey, bourbon, and vodka scattered around his room. I tidied up, placed him in the recovery position so that he didn't choke in case he vomited again, and I left a note, telling him that when he wakes up, to please resist the temptation to repeat his antics, and that I would speak to him later. I hated him for relapsing because I knew he was better and stronger than that, but I also hated myself because, well, I knew on some level I was to blame. I was around 35 minutes into my journey when Mike came across something that made my brow lower. In the road, there was a car, parked diagonally across both lanes. The hood of the car was facing in the direction that I was traveling, and the hood was popped. It was hard to tell until I pulled up around 50 yards from the stationary vehicle that someone was under the hood attempting to fix the issue. I climbed out and began walking over to the car. I squinted my eyes through the gap between the car's hood and the windscreen, as well as where the hood was propped up. The man was wearing all black from what I could tell. There was something off, though. Like, why was the car across the 2 lanes? I could understand if the vehicle had been in a collision, but it looked pristine. "Hey, is everything okay? Do you need me to call someone?" I yelled out to the man. Nothing. I began to feel extremely wary about the situation I was in. And then my suspicions were confirmed when I heard something behind me. An engine. I turned tentatively and saw that a dark transit van with blacked-out windows was flying towards me. It broke sharply around 75 yards from my car and skidded into a stationary state, with the side doors of the van facing me. I was frozen. I watched in terror as the van door slid open, and out jumped 4 large men. They were all wearing dark combat gear and bomber jackets. Their faces were covered by black balaclavas, and they were rushing towards me. The most alarming thing about them were the weapons they were carrying. 2 had pistols with silencers, 1 had a baseball bat, and the other was carrying a mallet. I instinctually turned and began to run towards the man with the broken-down car, completely forgetting how weird he was in his own right. That's when I saw the man had now come out from behind the hood of the vehicle, and he was walking towards me. He was also wearing a balaclava, and he was carrying a claw hammer. My eyes widened, and not even my La Prairie skin caviar could hide how pale I went in that moment. My adrenaline surged into my veins, and my fight-or-flight response began to toy with which way to go. As the man who was under the hood got close, my body finally made up its mind, and I fled back to the car, stumbling and tripping as I tried to sprint in my heels. I managed to get to the car before the men reached me. I got to the door and flung it open. I fumbled in my pockets, desperately trying to find the keys, my only lifeline. When my pockets turned up nothing but a half-pack of gum and a lipstick pen, my heart dropped. I turned to the group of masked assailants, insidiously cantering towards me. I turned to the left and saw the lone man standing still. Through his mask I could see he was smiling, almost chuckling. His gaze fell to the floor and he got down on one knee. He rose from the ground seconds later, holding in his hand the keys to James's car. I was frozen again. The only movement from myself was my head snapping from left to right, watching as the men continued to close in from both sides. When suddenly, I was hit with an intense sense of clarity. This was a federal agent's car. I quickly lunged under the seats and began to tap my hands around, searching for a weapon. James was on administrative leave and had to surrender his FBI-issued pistol, but I would bet my life, essentially I was, that he still carried an emergency gun. And I was right. There, taped to the bottom of the passenger side seat, was a Glock. I ripped it from its adhesive holster and quickly pulled out the magazine. I wasn't sure how many bullets were in. I didn't have time to find out, but it felt heavy. There were enough to take some of these fuckers with me, and at the very least, I only needed 1 bullet to not give them the satisfaction of putting me through something horrible. The man who had the keys to the vehicle was just outside the window. He ripped open the door and lunged inside the car and grabbed me by the hair and started to drag me out of the car. I pulled so hard I was out of the vehicle in 3 forceful tugs on my blood-red curls. My back and head hit the tarmac so hard that as he stood over me with the hammer, he was merely a black blur and nothing more. He raised the hammer above his head and was just about to bring it down on me when I raised my arm and pulled the trigger. His brains exploded and the contents of his skull membrane sprayed all over my face, clothes, and the side of James's car. I dragged myself to my feet, still in a haze from my ordeal thus far. Then, without warning, the passenger side window exploded outwards, glass slicing my face as it came into contact with my skin. I considered myself lucky, however, as it was a bullet that had caused it, probably that had missed me by no more than a couple of inches. I dropped down to the floor, taking cover from more bullets that burst the other window and begun to rain into the metal chassis of the car. I crawled and pushed my back up against the back tire to provide more cover, and that's when I saw it. Underneath the rim of the tire, stuck to the underside of the car, was a magnetic GPS tracker. I looked down at the last piece of the puzzle. I'd wondered how these men had found me. Hansen had put this on our car, no doubt, when he was putting those addresses together for us. When we'd confronted him and requested that he give us an updated address for the Darmans. Clearly he knew we were getting too close to the truth. He gave us an address in the middle of nowhere, and the tracker allowed these men to see when we were getting close.
"Where's the other one? They said there'd be a man too. We need both,"
one of the men said to the others, indicating they were just on the other side of the car.
Don't bitch. Take her alive. Use her to lure him out here. Easy save," one of the men replied. "Pablo said we can do what we want with her if we take her breathing, and I want some time with that," one of the men whispered menacingly.
"Hey, you get in line," another snapped back under his breath.
I needed to act fast. "Oh, miss, come out and put the gun down. There's nowhere to go now. No one's coming to help you," the first man instructed. I assumed he was the leader of this pack. I took a deep breath and prayed. I rolled around and fell on my side. I aimed the pistol under the car at one of the men's feet. I pulled the trigger and watched the flesh and bone of his ankle burst into a puff of red mist and smoke. He screamed in agony and fell onto his back. I aimed once again, and this time I put one right in his neck. The others began to fan out, not wanting their feet to be blown off too. I quickly reached through the open car door, the blood of the first man still dripping on the back of my neck as I reached in. I grabbed my bag that had my phone inside. I fired a couple of shots at the men, causing them to duck behind what cover they could find, and I fled towards the car that originally blocked the road. James's car was useless now. It was shot to shit and the tires on the other side were full of bullets. But I was hoping the first man had left the keys in the ignition, perhaps wanting a quick getaway from the scene after I was dragged into the van by the others. I left my heels this time. Running barefoot, the red-hot tarmac scorching the soles of my feet was the least of my problems. I managed to reach the vehicle just as an errant bullet struck the corner of the propped hood, no more than a centimeter from the back of my head. I jumped into cover and opened the passenger side door. I looked inside, and the shred of hope that I had left my body. The men were now hiding behind James's car, taking cover. I could see the top of their ski masks from my vantage point. One of them poked his head out to survey the situation. I took aim at him and pulled the trigger. The gun clicked. I pulled the trigger again, and it clicked once more. The man must have been able to sense my horror by the look on my face, as I looked at the empty gun in pure dismay. I heard the man begin to snigger at my now obvious predicament. He informed the others it was safe to come out. And the men stood up. They were all smiling now, and they were heading this way. I quickly pulled out my phone and checked if I had a signal. No such luck. And the men were getting ever closer. I held the phone in the air, desperately trying to find some sort of signal off the car's antenna. Just when the men were around 25 yards away from me, I got one bar. I quickly pulled up James and pressed call. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't have time to redial 911, so just before the men grabbed me, I rambled out what I could. "James, I'm on Old Highway 50. I know who killed those girls. They're here, and they're about to take me." Before I could relay anything about Hanson, one of the men ran around the car and knocked me to the ground. He stamped on the phone hard. I watched as the pieces of plastic shards and electric components exploded across the road, and I knew in that moment I was dead. My body gave an almost involuntary response of letting out a loud, piercing scream before I shot to my knees and began running. I was quickly caught by two of the men. "Oh, baby, where do you think you're going? The only place you're going is to take us to your partner. It's a long drive, so I think we can have some fun on the way." One of them snarled at me and let out a cackle. They began to drag me, kicking and screaming towards the van, whilst the other man ran ahead and jumped into the driver's side door. They opened the van door and violently threw me inside. One of the men reached inside and grabbed a jerry can. He handed it off to the other man and instructed him to torch the leftovers. The hulkish thug nodded his head and jogged over to James's car. With almost minimal effort, he threw the bodies of his fallen associates into the back seat of James's vehicle and doused it in gasoline. He postured up, attempting to strike a match from his pocket. As he did this, the driver made a call. We've got her. You can take down the roadblock now. We need to find the Fed. Now, we'll meet you at the..." But his sentence was cut short by the sound of a rifle firing. We all turned to see where it had come from. We were greeted by the sight of the man with the jerry can, stood there, matches still in hand. Except his head was smashed like a watermelon. He hung for a few seconds before crumbling into a heap.
This allowed us to see that there was a man resting a rifle on the back end of the decoy vehicle. A few seconds passed, and another gunshot sound pierced the quiet country air. A hole blew in the side of the man guarding me, and he bent over in pain. I didn't need another invite. I kicked the man in the back, knocking him to the ground in a prone position. I climbed out of the van and ran to the rifleman, who was frantically waving me over. The driver obviously didn't want to join the Bullet Club. He fired up the engine and tore off back the way it had come from originally. When I reached the man, he quickly ushered me down the road, where we climbed into his red pickup truck and sped so fast out of the area that the tires spun in the dirt, causing a large dust cloud. I stared out of the back window, praying that when the dust settled, I wouldn't see that van chasing us. Instead, though, all I could see was the man who'd been guarding me, stood in the middle of the road, just watching us as we drove away. I stared at him, wide-eyed, as the man simply reached down to his belt, pulled his pistol from his waist, put it to his temple, and pulled the trigger. Chapter 12.
Geez, miss, you done got yourself in a spot of trouble here. What's that all about?
He asked in an eager tone. Well, the man was definitely a real country dweller. His speech was that of someone who didn't interact with people much. I wasn't judging, though. This man had just saved my life. Well, I say man, he couldn't have been any older than 22. I'm, helping the FBI solve those highway murders. You heard of the Roadside Slayer? I stuttered, still overdosed on adrenaline.
No, ma'am. I don't watch the news all that much,
he said, sounding a little embarrassed. But again, I didn't judge. He spent his time on the firing range rather than binging TV shows, and for that I was forever thankful.
Those men are responsible. They have to be,
I stuttered to myself.
Yeah, I knew something wrong was up, 'cause I saw the road was closed for fixing, and darn, government never do any work out here. Seemed fishy to me, so decided to check it out. Good job I did, huh?
He sounded proud. I simply nodded, frantically in agreement. I could barely string a sentence together.
I need to call my partner. Do you have a phone?
I managed to ask, desperately trying to calm my nerves. The man shook his head again, and he looked down in shame. No, ma'am, I'm real sorry. I don't have one of those cellular phones. His speech was impaired, seemingly suffering from some sort of learning difficulty.
Well, I don't live far, though. Just on my uncle's farm. They have a phone there. You could call someone. He's out right now. He won't mind, I'm sure of it,
he said assuringly. I nodded in return and smiled warmly.
Thank you,
I gasped, emotionally, as I began to tear up. He smiled back.
Well, name's Tuck.
Ruth, I replied. He nodded, acknowledging we were now on first-name terms. He turned back to the road, sped up the truck, and made his way to the farm. We arrived at the farm around 15 minutes later. A quiet, desolate structure. I wasn't sure what the boy's uncle farmed, but it didn't look to be very fruitful. Well, as long as it had a phone, I didn't care. The farm was off the grid at the bottom of a 300-yard dirt path that was hidden by overgrown trees and shrubs. If you didn't know it was there, you would never find it. The very physical definition of off the grid. We pulled up outside the barn and the boy jumped out. He opened up the barn door before getting back in the truck and driving it inside. He instructed me to jump out and exit the barn, which he closed behind him.
Well, I got to take care of a couple of things, but you're welcome to head on in and use the telephone, he offered. I nodded my head once again.
Thank you, I will. Where is it? I asked, more fluently this time. My nerves were almost settled now.
Oh, yeah, it's just down the hall, opposite the third door on the left.
Once you go in the front door, you'll see it, he informed me. I smiled once again and thanked him for everything he'd done for me today. Don't mention it, ma'am. And relax, those bad men can't hurt you now, Tuck assured me.
He made his way around the back of the barn whilst I headed to the front door of the ranch house, which was just adjacent to the barn. I walked up the porch steps and pulled back the screen door protector. The springs needed a good oil job and the noise went right through me. I pushed through into the house and made my way down the hall as directed. The landline phone sat on a table opposite the third door on the left, just as he said. I found myself jogging over to it eagerly. I didn't know James's number off by heart, so I simply dialed 911. The phone rang twice before the operator picked up. "Hello? Do you require police, fire, or ambulance?" "Police, please," I replied. "One moment," the operator said. A brief pause followed before the call was connected. "Yeah, hello? Kansas State..." The call cut off. I tapped the receiver a few times, but it was useless. There was no dial tone. It was then I heard someone approaching the house. The fear was back. Shit, they'd found us. I frantically started to look around for somewhere to hide. I quickly scanned the house, not having time to run, as I could now see a masked figure in dark clothing. I could see through the stained glass in the front door that he was approaching the house. I grabbed the first doorknob I could find, turned and flung it open. I dived inside and closed it behind me without seeing what I was entering. I crouched down and tried to stay quiet. It was pitch black, so I assumed it was a closet or a broom cupboard of some fashion. I stayed quiet, hearing the man enter the house, the springs being a dead giveaway. I was trying to control my breathing, but the horrible smell coming from behind me was revolting. I turned quietly and put my hands out and felt around, and I discovered that I wasn't in a closet. I was in a basement. Without warning, the door was ripped open. I snapped my head around and looked up at the man. What I saw was the most insidious thing I'd ever seen in my entire career as a criminal psychologist. Stood there was the boy, Tuck. I recognized his black fleece jacket that he was wearing earlier, along with his ripped jeans and boots. But there was one change to his appearance. He was wearing the head of a pig. I don't know if it was my body screaming that I couldn't take any more adrenaline, or I just couldn't comprehend the horror in front of me. But I went lightheaded and fell backwards. I tumbled down a single flight of wooden stairs until I struck the cold concrete at the bottom. Tuck began to slowly and methodically walk down the steps. Whilst I rolled around, groaning in my blunt agony, I saw what was causing the smell. In the middle of the basement sat a chair, a simple metal chair that was covered in bits of flesh, some fresh, some rotting, and the chair and the floor surrounding it was soaked in blood, wet and dried. Next to the chair there was another simple metal desk. On it lay tools, pliers, bolt cutters, hacksaws, files, clamps, knives, hammers. There was also a collection of vile sex paraphernalia. These were also caked in red and brown. In the corner was a mattress. I don't need to repeat myself again in telling you what it was covered in, amongst other stains too. I began to cry as Tuck reached the bottom of the stairs. It was useless getting a weapon from the desk. That would almost certainly seal my death. The biggest cause of women's stabbings in home invasions is them grabbing a knife from the kitchen. Men are significantly bigger and stronger than the average woman. Short-range weapons are usually easily disarmed from the woman and end up being used on them instead. And the best thing to do is run or hide. The only problem was I could do neither. Tuck pulled back his fist and snapped it forward. It went black so fast, I didn't even feel it. Oh my god, talk about a sudden change of events. Oh, did not see that coming, did you? Tell me you didn't. Of course you didn't. Where is this going next? Well, next weekend, Friday night, I'll be back on schedule. We will have the final parts of this epic story. And as soon as this finishes, we're going to have the follow-up story coming up. And yes, so the next few Fridays, it's going to be all in the Robert Cassidy universe. Can you believe it? Well, you better, because it's going to happen. Well, that's enough for this Saturday evening. Back to my regular schedule next week. Something awesome lined up for Monday as well. Until then, sweet dreams, my dear friends, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.